Hi, and welcome to The Bold Space, where I am starting the conversation on race with my friends. First, I want to set up the space as not only a safe space where we can feel free to say what's necessary, but also a bold space, because a lot of these conversations haven't been had and they need to be had on race, especially between white people and black people. And so I hope that we can feel safe in the sense that we can say what we need to say and all grow from it, but be bold in what we think about and what we think about moving forward. So this week, I have with me one of my writing partners, Matthew Greene. Give a little introduction about yourself.
I'm a playwright, lyricist. I live in Brooklyn. I work in arts education and in theater.
Great. And we met, what was that? Would that be 3 years ago? In 2017? No, 18.
2 years ago.
2 years ago in the first year of the BMI program at the Layman Engel Musical Theatre Workshop at BMI. And I don't think we really had too much contact until we wrote together, really, or until we knew we were going to write together and write, which is still to this day one of my favorite songs that I've written. Safe as I can, not safe as I can, still dancing. We'll get to safe as I can later. With that, so I want to talk first a little bit about what it was like. What was your impression when you first heard my music in class, as one of, 5 black people, I think, in our class? Or something like that. I mean, it's a small number, and we'll get to that. But what were your first impressions of me when we first had class, and then when we met finally?
Right, and one of, I think, only 2 black composers.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my first reaction. I mean, my first reaction, and it's boring, but it just was that your music is so you're so competent and skilled, that there's skill and technique and that there's a knowledge. I mean, this is what we sort of bonded over before we worked together. I think just when we were socializing and getting to know each other, we bonded over, we just have this love for musical theater as an art form and for sort of the canon of musical theater. And then I think there was just an energy to the things you wrote. And I think there was a freshness with an interpretation of classic musical theater that felt fresh and energetic, that I really responded to and really liked.
Was there ever a moment, or did any of my music ever come across as black per se, or was there ever a moment where you compared me to maybe other black writers, or was that even, a part of your assessment as we got to know each other?
Also, like, pretty early on, I think before we wrote together, again, we spent, there was an evening where a few of the gays from BMI hung out at your apartment, and it, after some drinks and things, we all gathered around the piano, and I think that was when I started to put the pieces together, that like your sort of your religious background and your time as a music director at churches, sort of throughout your life, really informed your music. And American musical theater is just like any American music, is just stolen from the traditions of blues and gospel and soul and then rock and roll, and so I think that there was, I think some of the energy and the freshness that I was feeling was a direct result of your experience sort of with praise music and with gospel music and in that. And so I think that's when I started to connect those dots of, you know, using music as a unifier and also as a way of lifting people's spirits is just sort of baked into your musical DNA. And it wasn't until sort of that moment that I put those pieces together.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think about my music, is I don't necessarily think of myself as a Black writer, as more of a writer who happens to be Black and have Black experiences. Because I would say, like, for me, church was definitely a large part, is still a large part of what influences my writing. But I also had some experience that I feel like some others, like, I was very, because I went to an art school starting at kindergarten, so I had musical theater. Like, one of the tracks that I remember going to sleep with as a child, and it was rotate between this and another one that I can't remember the name of, but it was As Time Goes By, and it might have even been the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing it, but it was this tape of, I remember this choir, it was the lush harmonies from the 40s, and I listened to that every night. And I think and so there's this interesting, which some of those lush harmonies and those chords came from Black people as well. And so it's like, but I have that kind of 40s. I also watched a lot of the musicals from MGM and all that from the 30s, 40s, 50s. And so that was an influence. And so, and also my parents were very good about not limiting, my experiences. I feel like I truly have like an eclectic taste, and my sound is eclectic because I can go in one song, oh, well, that's a reference to Sondheim. It's like, oh, well, that's a reference to like a Kurt Franklin gospel number. So it's like, you don't necessarily think they're going to end up together, but then somehow there's some unifying force that kind of brings it together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was something. I mean, everything that we've worked on together has been a study in pulling from different traditions, different eras, different genres of music, and so I think that was something that really helped our partnership be successful. Was that we wanted to sort of play with all the, all the toys in the toy box, and I think that you're really adept at doing that, which is fun.
Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, I think that's why we connect, and I really, I enjoy doing it. It's fun to write like that, and it's and I feel like when you do that, you can be interesting, because I hear some new musical theater, and I hear it, and it's good, and it's fine, but it almost is. It's trying so hard to be new that it becomes overcomplicated and overcomposed and overpooled, and and then I always think back to a Sondheim lyric, stop worrying if your vision is new, let others make that decision. They usually do, you know but and I also learned to kind of rely on that and trust myself a little bit better in BMI. What would you have to say about your experience with BMI and how here having the different points of view on your work, even though I would say the people of color group is small, they're still there on your work. How has that influenced your work?
I think, I mean, the BMI moderators are pretty upfront from the very beginning, and they say we're classicists. We're here to sort of teach classic form, and our examples all sort of come from Golden Age era things, and so I think there's at least some honesty up front about, like, this is a space that's very informed by one perspective, and we know what that perspective is. But then I think one of the joys of being part of that, or any writers group, is hearing the points of view of various people, and and I've found there are certain people who and it tends to be those who are a little in one way or another a little more distanced from the old white male perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I like sort of being held accountable and taken to task for things that I write, and I've seen it in feedback I've seen it in feedback other people have gotten, that there are people who are admittedly doing extra labor to make sure that that other voices are heard in that space, whether those are queer voices, female identifying voices, or non-white voices, non-cisgendered voices. I think that just like almost every institution in the theatrical world has a long way to go to being super inclusive, but those individuals who are there, I'm really grateful for the perspectives that have been brought up in connection to my work and in connection to others' works, because we're all sort of in the room together learning from each other's missteps, mm-hmm. and also successes.
Yeah. No, I we definitely are learning from each other greatly. And yeah, my thing with BMI is like, it's because also sometimes, number one, I feel it hard to comment in class, specifically for myself, is because I take more time to process things, and I am not the person that can hear something and go, oh, I have an initial reaction, but I also know my initial reaction is not going to be the best reaction or the one that's going to best help. It's usually I like it or I don't like it. I
usually am listening as an audience member, and I forget that most people in that room are listening as writers.
Mm-hmm.
But what I find is, like, as a writer, I'd rather hear what's your reaction as an audience member, mm-hmm. rather than what's your sort of dissection of my work as a fellow writer.
Yeah, because we're not writing for a group of writers to watch the show. We're writing for an audience. The audience is not going to ever be 100% writers.
Right. And I tend to really like that sort of vague, I don't know what to do with that feedback when I present something, whether it's at BMI or thinking back to like college or any sort of situation in which I'm getting feedback. I'd rather hear just sort of some unadorned, honest feedback than someone who would have done it differently and can mm-hmm. explain how they would do it differently, or someone who and so as I'm listening to stuff in the room, I'll think like, I don't comment very much either. It's partially because like my social anxiety just really flares up if I ever raise my hand and I'm not called on. I feel like an idiot. It's just my own thing. But often my reactions will be something like, well, I was kind of bored by that. Or like, that was just really fun. That really got me going. And those types of comments aren't really the norm in that room.
Yeah. So. Well, because with those comments, because then I can go, okay, it made you feel that way, and then I can evaluate as a writer, either that's not how I want you to feel it, or yes, this is exactly how I want you to feel. Sometimes, oh, I feel uncomfortable. Yeah, you should feel uncomfortable by this, and that's also, I find sometimes hard, is that, as a Black writer, I've definitely learned to go, okay, that's a technical thing. Okay, that's just because they don't get the reference. And there are a lot of things sometimes that I feel like, even musically, certain lines that I'll add in, or certain things that I like and I ultimately keep in, but that they're like, oh, maybe this was this, and I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand the reference, I think is, and I've had to like learn to go, oh no, your writing is fine, your writing is good. Yes, there are things that can improve, but sometimes it's because the reference is missed. And I feel like if we had more, because you could always say, well, should be more diversity in the class, but I also feel like part of the problem, because I even think about my audition when I went there, I was the only Black person that was there in the lobby that day. And I have a feeling there's not too terribly a large number of Black people that are of the standard that are getting in. And part of me feels like, because I was actually talking to some of my other writer friends, as they feel like that they're like, what's the point of going over there? There's no Black people that are on the panels or on the board, or even people of color, really. I mean, I think the board is mostly white men and a few white women. And then, if there was some, they're missing, they complain that they're missing, they feel like they won't be heard from the beginning simply because they don't see any color from the top. And so they don't even bother. They're like, I'll just find another way. And it kind of saddens me, because they're people that would be very good and I think would help blossom the program even to another step, yet they feel from the onset that their voice wouldn't even begin to be heard. So there's like, why the point? What's the point?
Right. Well, and it's I don't want to presume to put words in anyone's mouth, but I've had similar conversations with writers that I know who say, yeah, it's just, it doesn't really seem like it's a place for me. And one, like, there's nothing sacred about BMI as a place, but I think it's disingenuous to ignore the fact that, like, there's a certain amount of like cachet that goes along with having this well-known Tony-winning workshop in your resume. And if people feel like they don't have access to that, then that's an issue. And so to say, like, well, yeah, probably maybe everyone should go where they're comfortable, but like, if this is a space I can benefit from without having to feel uncomfortable, then that's privilege. Then that's
well, it's also similar to like saying, this is the thing that has gotten the award. This has been, because to be honest, I have, even though they're not things specifically about Black theater or about Black people, I think I have grown a lot as an artist in this class, and I think I have learned a lot of what to do and what not to do. And I think a lot of other people could benefit this. And I hate to be, it's kind of like similar to how I feel about BET. I think BET is wonderful, and I think it is great because you can go there and you can find curated shows for exactly what you want. But there's a large population of people, and especially among critics, it's always, BET is, I feel like, always looked at as the other. It's, and because it's not the main network, there's this dichotomy. Is like, do you go create your own, but then you feel like you're just the other, you're not equal to.
Right. But then there's a question of it's all so complicated, and I find myself wanting to first step is wanting to understand the position that other people find themselves in, and to try and empathize with the really unique challenges that I don't have to face. And it's hard to think like, well, assimilation certainly isn't the goal. Segregation certainly isn't the goal. Equity is long-term, like equitable solutions really are the goal. But what is and I think there's so much differing opinion, and I'm actually sort of trying to not have super strong opinions about this, because I think I don't really need to. This is something in which I can really be a follower. In sort of figuring out, like, yeah, what is the best way to address that lack of access and diversity of the room, but also the inclusion of voices once they're in the room, and the equity of opportunity of those who are in the room, those who are trying to get into the room, those who have been in the room and are trying to get work outside. And I mean, yeah, this is a long-winded way of saying I don't know what the solutions are. I'm really trying to listen to people who are speaking up and saying that there are some possible solutions that need to really be taken seriously, at not just at BMI, but really just New York professional
throughout, and throughout the whole community. Just there's a lot of conversation to be had, even within BMI, because I know some of the people that are on the staff have even reached out to some of my collaborative partners, like, how do we fix this? And the conversation has started. So I want to say that is that I do acknowledge that the conversation has started. But I hope that, because also too, I don't want people to feel like Black people are trying to take over. Like, that's not the goal, and that kind of will take me into For Smiling Girls. Is that so? For Smiling Girls is a show that I had an idea about actually in a staff meeting at the church where I work, and Liz Sweeney, who is our children's director, we were talking about it. She had the idea, and we took it, and it kind of developed. And then one day, actually the same night that you were talking about earlier, where we were here at the apartment, we started talking about it. And it was the first time with a collaborator ever that I said an idea, and then the next idea I was thinking came out of somebody else's mouth. And it just kind of happened. And then we continued the conversation over Facebook. And then I was like, this, we need to write this show. And so, I talked to Matthew, we're writing the show. And we took a trip to Birmingham and got to meet with the families and see the Civil Rights Museum. And what did you learn during that trip to Huntsville to the Civil Rights Museum and meeting these families and whatnot?
Yeah, a lot, and a lot of, how like you can intellectually know something, but not actually, like, it doesn't actually sink in until you've emotionally connected in a significant way to those things. So, like, before we took the trip to Birmingham, I did the good book writer thing, and I bought a bunch of books and read them, and firsthand accounts, some really great works of scholarship, and a history of the city of Birmingham and the civil rights movement, and a lot of the events that I have intellectually known about for my whole life. But being there and just speaking with people and doing those interviews and hearing firsthand accounts of people's experiences, it taught me sort of on a visceral level the reverence with which these stories need to be treated, and I think we can all point at several examples from popular culture and high culture of ways in which the stories such as those that we heard have not been treated with very much reverence or respect, or have been commodified or manipulated. And I think one of the biggest takeaways near the end of the trip, and we talked about this, but one of the biggest takeaways was me saying, I don't know. So For Smiling Girls is not a project I would have sort of presumed to take upon myself. And if you hadn't approached me to write it with you, because I think several times I've asked you, why do you want me to work on this with you? And the answer was always just about the work. The answer was always like, I just, we collaborate well together, and we've written some things together, and it has gone well, and we seem to speak the same language. We're able to create good work together. So it's always just been about that. But the elephant in the room is always like, I don't know that I need to be telling this story. And so that trip, I think, was really important for coming to terms with sort of the two conflicting ideas that are now in my mind about that project, which are, this is a story that's so important, and that I feel really passionately needs to be told. And if I can serve that story and serve that narrative and listen and amplify voices, then I want to do that with as much integrity as is possible. And also, the other conflicting idea is I need to make space for the I need to make space for the reality that I don't know everything I need to know to write this story. That I alone can't write that story. And I guess that's one thing I learned on the trip was I realized, like, yeah, this is something that needs to be dealt with reverence and with respect and with honesty and with integrity and with heart. And if I can be a part of that process, then I am really grateful to be part of it, and I take that responsibility really seriously. But also, like, I need to know when to step back, and when to. But in general, white people need to know when to be quiet. And as you know, Derek, I like to talk, and so it's a very important lesson for me of just like, it's sometimes you need to be quiet. So yeah, that's the very complicated answer to that question.
Yeah, and it's but also I feel comfortable enough with you to just say it. And also too, I think that's part of it is we both have made each other feel comfortable enough to just be like, just like, calm down, you know. And also, but it in a lot of ways infuriates me and it makes me upset that and because you know this your fears from wanting to write this show come from a very valid place of thinking about how people would react to it, and because it's exactly how I feel and how I doubt myself about if I'm writing just a normal show that doesn't have Black people in it. If I'm like I'm writing The Secret Adversary in class, it's a similar feeling of do people just expect me to write the Black show? You know what I'm saying? Of this, and it makes me feel bad that people wouldn't be able to just take it for the art. They'd have to bring the race into it. And yes, I know there's race and it has to do with race, but they also understand. I was thinking about this earlier about why, because I think it was like, why did I want you to write the show? And like, yes, it's about the art, but it's also about, for me, the story is about Black people and it involves the lives of those 4 girls, but it's so much more. And it almost tells the story of kind of what Black people have been through from that point on, in the reimagining of their lives part. But I don't want this to just be a show for Black people. I want this to be a show for everybody, and specifically white people. I want white people to come see the show and be able to understand it in a way that touches them and actually makes them think. And having your voice on helps me as a writer curb, okay, maybe this is a reference that I get, but maybe most white people wouldn't get this reference. How can I make it a reference that people will get? How can I curb it? Because, you know, I have an end goal with the show. I want people to learn from it. I want people to grow from it. And, you know, it makes me upset because it's a similar feeling. And I can't sit here and ask for equality and ask for those things and then let people turn around and do the same thing back and discriminate against you for writing the show, when also without knowing the full facts, because you're not, you know, just a white writer. You, and we'll talk about this later, but you have an African-American son, you have an African-American boyfriend, and you work with a company in Brooklyn that works with youth of color and youth, you know, underprivileged youth. And there's so much more to you than just the color of your skin. And I feel that, you know, and that it makes me sad that you are also having to feel that things, but also makes me know that you understand how I feel as a Black person and how I feel, or not that you understand it fully, but you can sympathize on that level and you understand some of what goes through my head as well.
Right. I mean, I'll literally never understand what your experience is as a Black man in the United States in 2020. Like, I will never actually understand that. And and that, that's real. And it's interesting, like talking about the expectation that's placed on you to write a quote unquote Black show, and you're writing an Agatha Christie adaptation, and that defies people's expectations. And I do want to like just sort of flag that I don't I don't feel that pressure. I think the same way. There's a difference between, as I've thought about it, like I don't feel that I'm being put into a box as a writer. I do feel like there are a lot of people saying I need to stay out of a couple of boxes, and so when I am venturing near or into those boxes, this is a long extended metaphor, but I do so very carefully. But I don't think I feel that same. I don't think I feel that same pressure of people having one expectation of me. And if
it's not just one expectation. It's also what you, and maybe I could have explained it better. It's also that and it's the way white people look at Black people. Like, I live on the Upper, for all intents and matters, I live on Fifth Avenue, and when I walk out of my building, people, or when I walk, especially if I'm not like dressed up in a suit going to church, something like that, they look at me a little bit like, what are you doing here? And it's that same kind of feeling of, why is he writing this show? Why is it Black? You know what I'm saying? I do feel that as well, on top of the other.
Yeah. There's this this very different, very added pressure, and I don't think there'll ever be. There's, I think there's this temptation with white folks like me who are trying to be one of the good guys, to want, because honestly, people should be asking that question. Like, people should be asking, why are you writing this show? I don't begrudge anyone for asking that question. I don't begrudge anyone for confronting me with that. Partly because it's something that Black writers and woman writers and all writers of color, like any and for a long time queer writers, those that were out, because Broadway was written by closeted gay men. Yeah, like
everything was written by closeted gay men. I mean,
yeah, any marginalized group has had to face those questions. So I'm not begrudging anyone for asking that kind of question, and I'm not necessarily like begrudging anyone for having dissenting thoughts or opinions. And I think something that I have been trying to do is not look for a seal of approval so that I can stop doing the work, so I can stop being introspective. I think it's really important for me to not be like, well, Derek's Black and he thinks I should be writing this. He doesn't have a problem with it, so it's fine. I think it's incumbent on me, because first of all, that's putting a lot of pressure on you to speak for a lot of people, and it's also it's disingenuous. It's it doesn't make any sense, and it would ultimately be an excuse for me to not be taking a long, hard look at the choices I'm making. I need to continually be keeping myself accountable, and so I'm never looking for like the that classic, like, well, I'm not racist, I have Black friends. I never want to try and like let up on holding myself accountable. So I think people should, once For Smiling Girls is on Broadway, I think people should be, or before, people should be asking that question, and I should have to answer it, and I should have to feel a little uncomfortable, and that's okay. And I shouldn't be surprised by the question. I actually should be asking myself that question every step along the way. It's.
But
I think
I just want
part
people
of
to
my
realize though that if they're asking that question simply because of the color of your skin, that's a similar thing that they do to, you know what I'm saying? Just realize what's, it's it's okay to have your opinions, okay to feel a certain way, but just realize what it is. I think the first step to changing everything is first realizing the racism and realizing the places where it exists, and then we can slowly work to break
right.
it down. The
Yeah.
slow road.
Well, and I don't think I'm of the mind that I don't think it's possible to be racist toward white people. I think that structural racism exists in one direction and one direction only. And I'm not. I don't have to worry if my biggest fear is someone maybe writing an op-ed about me, then I live a very safe and privileged life. Like if my biggest fear is that there'll be calls for me to not be a book writer on a musical, like that's a really easy place to be in. So like last year I read this Toni Morrison quote that I'm going to paraphrase it really badly. I should find the quote, but I read this quote where she was talking about the importance of being able to step outside your own story and really, like a writer's job is to imagine other stories. And again, I immediately was like, okay, good. Toni Morrison thinks I can do it, so it's fine. And I think while I really agree with that quote, and I think it is possible for white writers to write really powerful pieces that deal with subject matter and characters who are Black. I think that that's possible. I also think it's rare, and I think it's rare because it's hard. And we have I don't know, I'm veering into like
Go ahead.
socialist, anti-capitalist, but like the theatrical establishment is set up in such a way where power isn't shared and authorial voice isn't shared, and so there's writers are incentivized to not listen. Writers are incentivized to not collaborate. And
like I feel like Hairsprays and the shows that were, and to be honest, Hairspray is not just all Black people, it's also half white people, so breathe. And I have to remind people that, and they would be more acceptable and it would be better if there had just simply been somebody at the table during the conversation higher than an actor, higher than on the producing team, somebody running a theater. And I feel like, again, it's about finding a balance. It's not about and that you didn't say this, but I feel like a lot of people, or some people, pretty much just want to make Broadway Black, and it's not about doing that. What I really think would help is if you had, for instance, somebody that was a Black person that owned a theater and was producing shows, you would have that theater that is definitely far more Black heavy. And then you might have, an Indian person who owns another theater over here. And so you have, when the theater ownership and those producers across the board are more even, those voices are much more likely to be heard, and the playing field is more even. And then I think it allows space for Spawning Girls to be written by more than just Black people. And because also for me, at the end of the day, and I feel that this is what we're trying to eventually get to, is that it's about the work. It's not about whether I'm Black, whether I'm white. It's really about what the piece says and what's going to tell the story in the best way. That's what I care about. And I just wish others put that above things.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes just from experience, like people saying like, we've been burned before. Listen, like we'd love to give you the benefit of the doubt, but Green Book won the Oscar. And I think like, I think a lot of times I can look at the knee-jerk reaction of like, oh, this shouldn't happen, or like, oh, you shouldn't write this. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the fact that it's like people have done it badly a lot, and again, like there will be people who say like, even if you do it really well, you are taking an opportunity away from potentially a writer of color to tell this story, and you know, it's a valid argument, and it's one that I grapple with. I think, yeah, like to your point about you know, talking about previous works that have been written, and things that could have been flagged if there was anyone speaking up. Uh, but like even the language of like someone higher up than an actor is like reinforcing this very like capitalist hierarchical structure that commercial theater and things that strive to be commercial theater, which is most not-for-profit theater, we have this very hierarchical structure in the rehearsal room, which again I think is a big part of the problem, and the fact that there's not equal access for audience members, and so often the like you were saying, like the rationale becomes, you know, we have to create things that people want to see, but that people in that sentence is referring to a very specific subset of people.
Yes.
And so it's about audiences, and it's about the money, and it's about producers, and it's about theater owners, and it's like I think that's what a lot of what I've been seeing is really pointing to. This isn't just about again, it's like the conversation about the justice system and the police, and about the need to sort of defund police and reinvest in community programs. It's like, yeah, there's this isn't about a few bad apples. There's not a few bad apples in the theater community. There's a lot of bad apples in any industry, but shouldn't we be really questioning the structure of how things get made and how things get written, and how, like, that's what I think about, is like all of this is enabled by a structure that privileges wealth, which then privileges who holds that wealth, which historically has skewed to whiteness, and so I think I'm misquoting people all over the place, and I don't even remember who said this. I'm so sorry, but someone said the system isn't broken. It's working exactly how it's supposed to.
Yeah. I think I remember hearing somebody say that as well, and it's so many times I can't tell you the number of times it's come down to, well, if I had the money or an investor, somebody that would just put the money into my work, I could be, number one, doing so much more. Number two, I know I could run it and possibly run it better than it's been run. Or I know I have the team of people, because I have all of these ideas, but as a Black person, I often store them away in the back of my head, because I'm like, is that ever really going to happen? You know, because I'm also trying to think in reality, like, you know, what can I get done in reality? And it's a bad way of thinking to put all of your big ideas that could actually change the world or actually make change away, because you feel that they will never get heard because you're Black, or because nobody will ever take the time to think, oh, they can't run it. And simply because, and I understand, it's because maybe somebody had gotten the chance in the past and it just didn't go well. And I acknowledge that happens, but I don't know, it just feels like it's been a long time. I was doing the look, it's like nobody has won, a Black composer has not won the Tony for best score since The Wiz.
Since The Wiz.
And I think he's the only one.
He is. Yeah.
And that's part of why for 18 years of my life, I thought I could never be a composer. And I think back, and it does make me mad. I think back to even when I was a child, and I would just sit down and start playing things, because it's exactly what I do now as a composer. And I could have been using that talent then, but I never saw anybody, classical world, musical theater world, other than hip hop, and I didn't feel like I was the hip hop. That was the only place if mainstream felt like our voices were valid at that time. And that's part of why I'm doing this. That's part of why, because I am an introvert at the end of the day. I'm a house cat. I enjoy being indoors, but you know, I'm hoping that some little gay black boy in Alabama will also see this and realize that no, you have the potential to do this now, not later, not no matter what somebody says, you can do this, no matter what you look like.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think I look at like the even in recent years, just mainstream representation of seeing how much, for example, a black superhero meant to so many people close to me, and to their children, and to like seeing these sort of glimpses at what representation really could be and really could do have taught me a lot. Like I have looked at that and thought, for one thing, that's one area, as far as creators go, that's one area where I need to accept my role as elevating the voices of others. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that means I can't write. It just means that's something I can't do. I had a great conversation. I think we'll talk about this later, but I work in youth development for mostly Black and brown young people. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who essentially said, he said, you can do a lot of great work, and I'm really glad that you are. You can do a lot of great work with these young people. There is something you can't do, which is be Black. And he said, having teachers and role models who looked like me was very important when I was younger. And that's something that you actually won't ever be able to do. And you won't ever be a substitute for, and you need to be aware of that. And I think that's true in the arts as well. Like, there are things that I can do, and I am, committing myself to do the work, but like, that's something I can't do. And I have to be at peace with that. And I need to not hear that and be like, oh, well, but it's not my fault. It's not my fault that I'm white. I think there's a defensiveness that is natural but wrong. Like, there are certain things you just can't do, and that is something I am not able to do. What I can do is amplify and elevate the voices of others.
And we can actually continue to talk about exactly what you do at Opening Act and what that program is.
Yeah, so Opening Act it's a nonprofit organization that provides theater programming to high school students at under-resourced high schools. So essentially providing theater programs at high schools that don't have them. And in recent years, we have been expanding to the District 79, the D79 district, which is the alternative high school district, as well as middle school. So expanding sort of what programming we can provide to those communities that we serve. And I specifically, so I was a teaching artist with them for a couple of years, and I worked in various high schools in Brooklyn and the Bronx and Manhattan, doing these theater programs. And then I got hired to pilot a program, the post-secondary readiness program, which is called Act 2, which right now in its current iteration really is the alumni serving arm of the organization. And so most of what I do is alumni programming, and included in that is a workforce development program for our graduates who are young artists who are looking for careers. So I have 8 of these fantastic alums who work for me, and I give them jobs to like assignments and tasks and projects so they can build their employability skills at an arts education organization, while also partnering them with mentors in their chosen fields, giving them access to digital masterclasses, finding paid internships that were supposed to happen this summer, but nothing's happening this summer, so they will be later in the year. And so there's that program, as well as just broader programming for all of these alums. So these are, young people, mostly 18 to 25, who are those young people that you're talking about. They're the people who want careers in the arts, who sometimes question whether there's a place for them in the arts. That questioning, doesn't come from nowhere. And I take the responsibility really seriously of making it clear that there is a place, but that there are big structural issues that need to be addressed. And I do that mostly by paying people of color who are working in the industry to come in and teach master classes, and again speak to things that I can't or don't need to directly speak to if there is someone more qualified to talk about that. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful, and then also that kind of speaks to something. I think that like what you said about making sure you can amplify others' voices, and especially like giving. I think there's something that people should notice in how you're not just teaching the master class, but you're bringing in specifically people of color to teach master classes for these kids of color. And I think there's something to be said to that with even producing shows and producing stuff in theater, is that so often I feel like when producers option a show or they go to find a show, they, especially when they're white and it's a black show, they still feel like they can come in and change things and make it their own when it's not their art to be made. And the reality should be similar to what you're doing, where it's, I believe in you, and I believe in you as a person, so that I want to produce your work. Now do your work. Now I can have my comments on it, but at the end of the day, as a producer, it's not the producer's art, it's the writer's art. And because, did you watch the Griffins Matthews talk? And I watched that and I was like, that is exactly everything that I feel. That's exactly everything that I think about every single time I write a note on a page. That's what I think about in a lot of ways. And no producer should ever say, or even be allowed to say to somebody, step down as the lead actor and as the writer, and change the name of your show, or we're not producing it anymore. It should never be about that. Because if you enjoyed the person's art from the beginning, if you truly understood the art and knew where the art was coming from, you wouldn't feel that way. So instead of, I feel like so many people produce a show, it's because we have to do a black show. We have to do a black show now, or we have to do this show. And it's like, it's not enough just to produce it. I am grateful that some of it got done, and there are some great works that have come from that, but that's not enough. You should want to produce our work just the same as any work of anybody else, not because we're black, but because you're interested in us as an artist, and we just happen to be black, and therefore are, because that is one of the things that I think about as a writer, is I often kind of write things in my head, or write things with the premonition of, I'm going to have to do 90% of the work to get this to Broadway or to get this to wherever myself, because I know that if I try to go through the normal channels, so many things are probably going to get changed. It's my biggest fear, like, what is the show going to look like after I'm done? Because I know they're not going to understand these references. I know they're not, and it's not that they can't understand them, it's just they don't take the time to do the work and understand the art. And that's one of the biggest things that I'm afraid of as an artist, is finally getting that chance to have a show on Broadway, or have a show where it's Broadway renowned, but then everything gets changed. And it's like, what do you do as an artist? Do you say no? Do you not take the job and go on and try to figure out yourself? But then I feel like you're still becoming the other. You're still, it's a dichotomy of like, what do you do as an artist? Do you play the game until you get to a point where you have enough wealth, enough money to produce your own and create your own space, or what do you do?
And why should you have to self-select out of opportunities because other people are being assholes? And that's such a painful, such a painful thing to see people talking about, and especially, you mentioned Griffin Matthews and the video he posted. One of the most chilling things that he said was that the Amy Coopers of Broadway, but basically anyone, like any white person working in theater, he said, does not need Black people to achieve the highest levels of success. And that's certainly not true the other way around. And that was really chilling and really sobering when I heard that, thinking like, that's true. I have never had to consider the uncomfortable spaces I'll have to walk into, or the uncomfortable conversations I'll have to have, or the, whatever sort of pandering or anything that'll be expected of me in that realm, expected of me because of my race. That will never be asked of me. That will never be required of me. And fingers crossed I become a successful Broadway writer, but it had never occurred to me before that, and that's part of the problem, that it hadn't occurred to me. But like, it had never occurred to me that although I really want to work with a diverse array of people, and fully intend to do that and try and create work that is conducive to that, I don't need to. And if I wanted to, again, I don't, but if I wanted to only ever work with people like me, if I wanted to just like work with gay white men, who share a really similar background, and who we just have a shorthand, and there's really no work in creating those relationships, I could. And so I think part of it is, it's up to me to say that's not acceptable. It's up to me to say, I am not interested in achieving high levels of success without a diverse group of people around me, and without an inclusive environment around all of us, and without equity of opportunity for everyone. But it's up to me to, because if I didn't engage in that work, I probably wouldn't have to. And that sucks. So it's up to me, again, to hold myself accountable, and to really always ask, why do I only see white faces around this table? Or why do I only see white faces in this audience? Or what, in what ways am I contributing to that problem? And I certainly am in certain ways. And I need to hold myself to task for that.
Yeah, it really does suck. And it also hurts because I know, theater people, we tout ourselves as having some of the best community, and we are the place for the weird people to go. In a lot of ways we are. But, I never have the only generosity and the true way of expressing and bringing my art to another world, the only right way I've seen it done does not in the theater world at all. It was actually one of the people that goes to the church where I work. He made specifically sure to personally introduce me to each individual person and include me in the conversation.
Usually the mistakes that I made in sort of forming our relationship were because I wasn't listening.
Then I was like, it kind of made me go, wait, no, I am a composer. Why is it that I feel it odd for this to be, I am a composer. That is who I am, yes.
Because it's not an option to ignore the fact that we're two different races. That's not an option.
I can bring more than just my blackness to the table.
I lived such an insular Mormon existence that it's telling that the first big awakening I had was wait, we didn't let everyone be fully Mormon, but Mormonism was so great.
And it was the first time that I felt like a human and like I could exist outside of my blackness. And not that my blackness, I mean, but yeah, because in the past my blackness has been a hindrance.
I very much want to be part of the solution, for whatever that is, and I'll learn day by day what that actually means. And there are great people who are teaching me.